Emotional healing is not about forgetting. It's not about letting go in the simplistic sense that people often suggest. And it's definitely not about suppressing your emotions or pretending everything is fine. True healing is a profound and intimate process, one that very few people genuinely understand. In this video, we're going to unveil the hidden truths about this inner journey, truths that no one seems to talk about. Carl Jung, one of the most influential figures in psychology, once said, "What you resist not only persists, it dominates you, but what you accept transforms you." And that's the foundation of real healing. But how do we actually apply that wisdom in real life? How do we take our pain and, instead of allowing it to destroy us, use it as fuel for our transformation? If you've ever felt stuck in the same emotional loop, if you've tried to think positive or just let it go and found that it doesn't work, then this message is for you. Stay with us until the end, because we're going to reveal the most important step in the healing journey, the one that most people overlook entirely. Let's begin with this hard truth. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. This is the first and most common mistake people make when trying to heal. We deny, suppress, or downplay our pain. Why? Because from an early age, many of us were taught to be strong. We were told not to cry, to move on quickly, to get over it, and keep going. But what we don't face, what we bury in the shadows, continues to control our lives from behind the scenes. Jung referred to this hidden aspect of ourselves as the shadow, that part of the psyche where we store everything we've rejected or denied about ourselves, our anger, our fear, our trauma, our grief. We think that by pushing it down, we're getting rid of it. But in truth, we're only giving it more power. So how can you tell if you're denying your pain? You overreact to small things and don't understand why. You avoid thinking about certain memories because they make you uncomfortable or bring emotional pain. You feel a constant emptiness, a void you can't explain. You find yourself repeating the same destructive patterns in relationships, in your career, in your choices. You sabotage your own happiness without knowing why. Here's the simple yet uncomfortable key. You have to be willing to look within. You must stop distracting yourself with work, social media, entertainment, or superficial connections. You must stop numbing the discomfort and instead turn inward, even if what you find there isn't pretty. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This means that if we don't dig deep to identify the origin of our suffering, we are doomed to repeat the same cycles again and again. Why do some people end up in toxic relationships over and over? Why do others keep destroying their own chances of success? Because the wounds that created those patterns were never acknowledged. Unconscious beliefs are running the show. A powerful exercise you can try right now is unfiltered writing. Take a pen and paper and answer these questions honestly. What experiences from my past still hurt? What negative patterns keep repeating in my life? What emotions do I avoid feeling? Writing it down, seeing it with clarity, is an act of courage, because healing doesn't begin when we get over it. It begins the moment we choose to face it, head on. But why is it so hard to face our pain? Because our brain is wired to avoid suffering. It's a survival mechanism. We distract ourselves. We project our hurt onto others. We pretend to be okay. But the brutal truth is this: nothing changes if you don't face it. Nothing heals if you keep running. Most people aren't suffering because of what happened to them. They're suffering because they never processed how it made them feel. They are stuck in an unresolved emotional story, replaying it again and again in the background of their lives. Here's the breakthrough. When you finally allow yourself to see and accept your emotional wounds, you start to take back your power. Let that sink in. You cannot heal what you haven't recognized. You can't fix what you refuse to admit is broken. You cannot transform your suffering if you keep denying that it exists. And now, let's go even deeper. Because here comes a truth that will forever shift your understanding of healing. Pain doesn't disappear. It transforms. We've been told that time heals everything, that if you ignore your pain long enough, it will eventually go away, that if you just move on, the past will stop haunting you. But that is one of the biggest lies we've been told about emotional healing. Time doesn't heal. Time hides. What time really does is layer distractions and habits over an open wound. The wound remains, still alive beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to erupt again. And it always does. In a fight, in a breakdown, in an irrational fear, or a repeated mistake. That pain you thought you buried, it was never gone. It was only waiting to be seen. So what's the alternative? You allow it to transform you. Pain is not the enemy. It's a messenger. It's trying to tell you something about yourself. It's showing you where your heart broke so it can be rebuilt, stronger, wiser, and more whole than before. When you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and instead ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" you begin the true path to healing. The goal isn't to never feel pain again. The goal is to learn from it, to grow through it, and to become someone new because of it. Emotional healing is not a straight line. It's not instant. It's not easy, but it's real, and it's worth it. So if you're watching this and something inside you is stirring, if you feel like there's something within you that's been waiting to heal, then maybe this is your moment. Not to run, not to hide, but to begin. The journey of healing begins with truth. The truth about what you feel, the truth about what you've been through, and the truth about who you're becoming. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful transformation of all. Carl Jung saw it in a completely different way. Pain never truly disappears. It only changes form. It transforms into whatever you allow it to become. And this is where most people go wrong. If you don't take control of your emotional process, your pain will morph into resentment, fear, suppressed anger, into destructive patterns that keep repeating in your life over and over again. But if you learn how to use it, if you truly face it and process it, your pain can turn into something completely different, into wisdom, strength, and growth. Pain is energy. Use it, or it will consume you. Imagine suffering like fire. It can burn you and destroy everything in its path, or it can forge you into a stronger version of yourself. The difference doesn't lie in the fire, but in how you use it. Think of two people who went through the same traumatic experience. For example, two people who were betrayed by someone they trusted. One of them lets the pain consume them. They become cold, distrusting, incapable of opening up to anyone new. The other, on the other hand, uses the betrayal as a lesson. They learn to read people better, become emotionally stronger, but without losing their ability to love. What changed? The experience was the same, but the way each person chose to transform it was different. The key is not to eliminate the pain, but to decide what you're going to turn it into. The mistake is trying to forget, and that's where most people fail. Most think healing means forgetting, but that's impossible. Your mind doesn't work like that. You can't erase the past. You can't delete painful memories as if they never happened. Trying to forget is like sweeping trash under the rug. You don't see it, but it's still there, rotting, and sooner or later, it spills out into your life. The problem isn't remembering what happened. The problem is the story you tell yourself about it. If every time you think of your past, you feel hate, guilt, or resentment, then your wound is still open. But if you see it as a trial that forged you, if you reinterpret it as the fire that made you stronger, then you begin to turn your suffering into something useful. Exercise: how to transform your pain into growth. If you truly want to heal at the root and turn your pain into strength, do this exercise. Write down your deepest wound. Don't be afraid. Write it with brutal honesty. What marked you the most? What's that wound that still hurts when you remember it? Acknowledge how it's influenced your life. Don't ignore it. How has it affected the way you think, the way you act, the way you love? What patterns has it created in you? Find the hidden lesson. Jung said that within our shadow lies gold. Ask yourself, what abilities did you develop from going through that? How has it made you stronger? What can you learn from that experience? Rewrite the story from a new perspective, not as a victim, but as someone who grew because of what they lived. Instead of seeing that experience as a curse, see it as a challenge you overcame. Use your story for something positive. Share what you learned. Help others. Apply the wisdom you gained to improve your life. The power of accepting pain as part of the process. This is where many people get stuck. They think healing means never feeling pain again. And when they realize that it still hurts, they believe they've failed. But healing doesn't mean the pain goes away completely. It means it no longer controls you. It means you can look back without getting trapped, that you can remember without reliving the suffering, that what happened no longer defines who you are today. Healing is a process, not a destination. Healing is not a magic button. It's not a final point. It's a journey. And on that path, there will be days when you feel like you've made huge progress and others when you feel like you've gone backwards. And that's okay. What matters is to keep moving forward. And in the next part, we'll talk about something fundamental. How what you don't heal shows up in all your relationships without you even realizing it. Your emotional wound shows up in your relationships. Emotional wounds don't live in the past. They're not scars from a story that already ended. They're still alive, breathing inside of you, showing up in every interaction, in every bond you form with others. Carl Jung said that what we don't make conscious manifests in our lives as fate. In other words, what we don't heal, we repeat. And the worst part is, we repeat it without realizing it. Look at your relationships. Look at how you love, at how you connect with others, at how you respond to affection or rejection. That's where your wounds are. That's where your traumas hide, disguised as your personality. If you don't heal, you'll love from the wound, not from freedom. If you were abandoned at some point in your life, if someone left you when you needed them most, chances are you now live in fear of abandonment. And that fear becomes a lens through which you see all your relationships. Maybe you become dependent, clinging to people out of fear they'll leave. Or maybe you become distant, avoiding attachment at all costs so you won't suffer again. Maybe you need constant proof of love, because deep down, you don't believe someone could stay without a reason to go. None of that is love. It's just fear, disguised as need. It's your wound speaking, without you even knowing it. Childhood wounds turn into adult problems. Jung spoke of the wounded child within all of us. That child is still there, inside of you, asking for what it never received, searching in others for what it was denied. If you were ignored as a child, today you might feel invisible in your relationships. If you were constantly criticized, you may now be extremely sensitive to others' opinions. If the love you received was conditional, today you might feel like you have to earn love to be worthy of it. These wounds don't stay in childhood. They bleed into every relationship, every decision, every expectation you place on others. Why does the same thing always happen to you? Surely you've asked yourself that. I always end up with people who treat me badly. I always get betrayed. I always get disappointed. This isn't a coincidence. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you believe you deserve. If deep down you feel unworthy, you'll unconsciously surround yourself with people who reinforce that belief. Not because you choose them, but because it's the pattern you're familiar with. It's the emotional language you were programmed in. Self-sabotage is what happens when you run from what you say you want. Jung also spoke about the shadow, that part of ourselves we repress and that ends up controlling us. It's key. Sometimes we say we want a healthy relationship, but when someone treats us well, we feel uncomfortable. It seems boring. We pull away without knowing why. Why? Because our shadow is attached to the opposite. Because healthy love doesn't activate our wounds, and without our wounds, we don't know who we are. This is why many people end up sabotaging what they want most. Because healing hurts more than repeating the same pattern. Exercise. Discover how your wound affects your relationships. If you really want to heal from the root, you need to ask yourself uncomfortable questions. First, think about the relationship that hurt you the most. What affected you the most in that relationship? What pattern repeated in it that you had already seen before? Second, analyze how you react in relationships. Do you tend to distance yourself when someone gets too close? Do you need constant validation to feel safe? Are you afraid people will leave, even without a real reason? Third, recognize the wound behind that. Where does that fear come from? At what moment in your life did you learn that love was unsafe, that people leave, that you were not enough? Fourth, reprogram your mind. Change the story you tell yourself about who you are. If you grew up feeling invisible, tell yourself you deserve to be seen. If you grew up feeling abandoned, remind yourself that love doesn't always leave. This process isn't instant, but it's the only way to stop repeating patterns. The key to healing is to take responsibility. As long as you keep blaming others for what happens to you, you'll stay stuck in the same cycle. Yes, maybe you were hurt. Maybe you were wounded in ways no one should ever experience. But healing doesn't happen when you wait for an apology or when someone acknowledges your pain. Healing happens when you take control and choose to change the story. And in the next point, we'll talk about the hardest but most important step. Stop blaming and take control of your life. The real healing begins when you stop blaming and take control. There's an uncomfortable truth few people want to accept. As long as you keep blaming others for your pain, you'll stay trapped in it. Your childhood, your parents, society, the person who broke your heart, the injustice you suffered. All of it shapes your story, but doesn't define your destiny. The problem isn't what they did to you. The problem is what you do with it now. Carl Jung said that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And one of the most common ways the unconscious takes control is through blame. The blame game. When you become a prisoner of your own story, blame is a double-edged sword. It can make you feel justified, but it also keeps you in a victim position. When you blame others, you release yourself from the responsibility to change. It's easier to say, "My parents made me this way," or "People always betray me," or "Life has been unfair to me." It's easier to keep repeating the story than to take control and change it. Because changing means taking responsibility. It means accepting that even though you didn't choose what happened to you, you can choose what to do with it. And that's terrifying, because it means there are no more excuses. It means that if you're still in the same place, it's because you're allowing it. The trap of waiting for justice. Many people stay stuck in pain because they're waiting for something that will never come. A sorry, a compensation, a closure. They expect someone to acknowledge the damage they caused. They want life to somehow give them back what was taken. But life doesn't work that way. Healing doesn't come when the world apologizes to you. It comes when you stop waiting for justice and take the reins of your story. Ask yourself, how much longer will you wait for an apology? How much longer will you let the past control your present? How much longer will you let the story you were told define the story you can write? Taking control doesn't mean denying the pain. It's not about ignoring what happened to you or minimizing it. Some wounds are deep, and the pain they caused is real. But there's a big difference between recognizing your pain and allowing it to control you. When you keep reliving what they did to you, you keep giving them power over you. When you base your identity on suffering, you become a prisoner of your own story. When you decide that you won't carry that weight anymore, you reclaim your freedom. The ego and resistance to change. The ego is your worst enemy when it comes to healing. Because healing means admitting that some things you believed were true are not. It means recognizing that maybe you weren't only a victim, but also made decisions that hurt you. It means accepting that even though someone hurt you, you're now the one responsible for still carrying that pain. It means stopping the justification of your suffering and starting to build a new story. The ego doesn't want you to heal. The ego wants you to be right. It wants you to stay in the same narrative forever, because leaving it means facing the unknown. The hardest exercise, owning your part in the story. This is the hardest step, but also the most liberating one. You have to ask yourself an uncomfortable question. What has been your role in your own suffering? Not from guilt, but from responsibility. If you always end up in toxic relationships, what pattern are you repeating? If you feel that no one values you, how are you valuing yourself? If you're still stuck in the past, what's keeping you from moving forward? Most people run from this question because they'd rather hold on to the story that they are victims. But true healing happens when you stop seeing the past as a sentence and start seeing it as a lesson. The key, responsibility, is the door to freedom. You can't change what happened to you. You can't change the people who hurt you. But you can change what you do with it. You can keep suffering, or you can learn. You can keep waiting for things to change, or you can start changing them yourself. You can stay stuck in the past, or you can start building the future you deserve. The day you stop blaming and start taking control will be the day you truly begin to heal. And in the last point, we'll talk about the final transformation. Healing isn't about becoming who you were. It's about becoming someone stronger. Many people believe that healing means going back to the person they were before the pain, before the betrayal, before the abandonment, before the disappointment. But that person no longer exists, and holding on to the idea of recovering them only keeps you trapped in an illusion. Healing is not a process of restoration, but of transformation. It's not about going back. It's about moving forward with everything you've learned. Carl Jung said, "There is no awakening of consciousness without pain. Every wound, every loss, every difficult experience is an opportunity to evolve." The problem is, many want to heal without changing. Resistance to change. When pain becomes your identity. Here's the uncomfortable truth. There are people who don't want to heal because their suffering has become their identity. They are the one who was abused, the one who always suffers in love, the victim of a difficult childhood. And even if they say they want to overcome the past, deep down, they're afraid of who they would be without it. Why? Because pain, as destructive as it is familiar. It's known. And the ego prefers the familiar to the unknown. Healing means letting go of that story. Healing means no longer using pain as justification. Healing means embracing a new identity, and that is terrifying. If you are still the same after healing, then you haven't truly healed. True healing leaves scars, not because the pain remains, but because you become someone who could never have existed without that experience. The people who have truly healed don't say, "I want to go back to who I was." They say, "I'm stronger because of what I lived through." If after everything you've been through, you're still acting the same, thinking the same, and making the same decisions, then you've only suppressed the pain. You haven't healed. Healing hurts, but not because you relive the past. It hurts because it forces you to leave it behind. The hardest part of healing isn't remembering what happened. The hardest part is accepting that the past won't change, and the only way to honor it is to build something better. But there's something inside you that resists, something that says, "If I stop suffering, it's like what happened didn't matter. If I stop feeling bad, it's like I'm forgiving too easily. If I let go of this, then who am I?" This is the dilemma many people face. They cling to suffering because they feel that letting it go means betraying their own story. But they don't realize that not healing is the true betrayal. The final test, the moment you face your new self. There comes a point in the healing process where everything feels uncomfortable. You don't fit your past, but you haven't yet adjusted to your future. This is the critical point. It's where many people give up and go back to their old habits, old relationships, old wounds, because pain, even if it hurts, is a familiar place. But if you resist, if you move through that discomfort, something changes inside you. You realize that pain no longer has power over you. The person who used to hurt you no longer affects you the same way. The situation that once broke you now feels like a distant memory. The wound that used to define your life is now just part of your story, not your identity. The true sign of healing, your new perspective. How do you know you've truly healed? 1. You no longer seek revenge or justice, not because what happened was okay, but because your energy is worth more. 2. You stop identifying with the pain. You no longer say, "I'm a wounded person," but instead, "I'm someone who has overcome a lot." 3. You make different decisions. You don't repeat the same patterns. You don't keep attracting the same situations. 4. You find peace in uncertainty. You stop obsessing over what could have been and focus on what you can build. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean minimizing what you lived through. Healing means becoming someone so strong that none of that can define you anymore. The final question: what are you going to do with your story? This is where many people fail in the healing process. They don't use their story for something greater. Carl Jung believed that true transformation doesn't come from comfort or ease. It begins the moment you take your deepest pain and choose to turn it into something with meaning. That raw wound, that heartbreak, that darkness you thought would destroy you, can actually become the very material that forges your greatest strength. Some people take their suffering and turn it into breathtaking art. Others use it to heal those walking the same path they once walked alone. And there are those who harness that pain to build a life so fulfilling, so authentic, that it could only have emerged from the ashes of what once broke them. Pain, at its core, is just energy. And like all energy, it demands to be used. You decide whether to use that energy to tear yourself apart, or to create something that never could have existed without it. Healing is the most radical act of rebellion against everything that tried to destroy you. It's a declaration that says, you didn't win. It's choosing to rise when everything inside of you has been shattered. And no, don't aim to return to who you were before the pain. That version of you no longer exists, and perhaps they weren't meant to. The goal isn't to go back. The goal is to become someone entirely new, someone wiser, stronger, deeper, someone who carries the scars not as signs of defeat, but as proof of their strength, as reminders of the battles they've faced and survived. Healing is not forgetting. Healing is not pretending it didn't happen. Healing is transformation. It's alchemy. It's the slow, deliberate process of turning every wound into wisdom. Every scar you've earned had a purpose. Every moment you stood face to face with your shadow, you grew. You're not the same person who once broke. You are the one who endured, the one who refused to stay down, the one who kept going when it would have been easier to give up. Pain does not define your future. What defines your destiny is what you choose to do with that pain. And today, you are given a choice. You can keep running from it, blaming others, repeating the same old story. Or you can stop, breathe, turn inward, and decide that today is the day you take full ownership of your healing. You are not powerless. You never were. Today is the day you rise from the ruins. Today is the day you decide, I will no longer be a prisoner of my past. I will use it to shape the future I truly deserve. In the comments, write, I transform my pain into power. Let it be your commitment, your promise to yourself and to the world. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is ready for change, ready for a life you don't have to run from, a life of purpose, peace, and personal truth. But this is just the beginning. Click on the next video. It will leave you speechless and take you even deeper on this journey of transformation. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the content that can actually shift your entire perspective. Your life can change. Your healing is possible. We'll see you in the next video. Tell me something with absolute honesty. How many times have you said, I love myself, without actually feeling it? How many times have you repeated positive affirmations in front of the mirror, trying to convince yourself, only to feel that uncomfortable emptiness tightening in your chest, reminding you that you don't really believe the words you're saying? Why is it so difficult to truly love yourself. Let me make you a promise. By the end of this journey we will take together today, I will reveal to you the deepest truth I discovered throughout my decades exploring the human psyche, a truth capable of changing forever the way you see yourself, a truth that explains why self-love has been impossible until now. But to reach it, you must be willing to walk with me into the depths of your own darkness. Are you ready? My name is Carl Gustav Jung, and for more than 60 years of my life, I devoted myself to exploring the brightest and the darkest territories of the human mind. I worked with thousands of patients. I analyzed tens of thousands of dreams, and through that long journey, I uncovered something that modern psychology tends to ignore, not because it is insignificant, but because it is uncomfortable, because it challenges everything we believe about ourselves, because it demands that we look directly at what we fear the most. But before revealing that final truth, allow me to take you back to the moment where it all began, because my discovery did not rise from books or theories. It emerged from my own personal descent into the unknown. Let me take you to a very specific moment in my life. It was the year 1913. I was 38 years old. On the outside, everything seemed perfect. I was a respected psychiatrist. I had a family. My colleagues admired my work. I had built a solid reputation and a stable life. But inside, something was cracking. Something was shifting in ways I could not ignore. Every night when I closed my eyes, I entered places in my dreams that defied all logic and explanation. I saw ancient symbols. I heard voices that did not sound like mine. I encountered presences that felt as though they were rising from a deep, forgotten chamber of my psyche. Most people, when they begin experiencing something like this, run toward distraction. They turn on the television. Today, they bury themselves in their phones. They search for anything that will keep them away from that uncomfortable meeting with their inner world. But I made the most terrifying and liberating decision of my life. I decided to descend. Imagine your mind like a house. Most people live only on the first floor, in the bright rooms where everything feels familiar, orderly, predictable. That is your conscious ego. That is where your social personality lives, your masks, your roles, the version of you that I once called the persona. It is the version you carefully present to the world, the polite, functional, acceptable edition of yourself. But below that first floor, there is a basement, and in that basement lives everything you have rejected about yourself. Every impulse you were told was unacceptable. Every emotion you suppressed because someone taught you it was wrong. Every desire you hid because it didn't fit the image you tried to project. I called all of this the shadow. And here is the first secret I want to share with you. Listen closely, because this is essential. You cannot love yourself if you only love the character that lives on the first floor. You cannot experience true self-love while denying the existence of the basement. During my descent into my own unconscious, I came face to face with aspects of myself I had spent my entire life rejecting. I discovered anger where I believed serenity lived. I found unrestrained ambition where I imagined there was only a pure love for knowledge. I saw selfishness in places where I had built an image of generosity. And my first instinct, just like yours, just like anyone's, was to slam the basement door shut. I wanted to tell myself, that is not me. That is something else. That is an aberration. But then, I had a vision. In one of my encounters with the depths of the unconscious, I saw an old wise man who spoke words that changed everything for me. He said, "Carl, what you deny does not disappear. It only grows stronger in the dark. What you reject in yourself does not stop being yours. It simply begins to rule your life from the shadows." Think about this applied to your own life. Hold on to this truth, because you will need it at the end when I reveal the complete secret to you. Every time you say, "I am not a jealous person," while feeling jealousy burning in your chest, you're not dissolving jealousy. You're simply sending it down to the basement of your psyche. Every time you claim, "I am not an insecure person," while you hide your insecurities behind a carefully rehearsed mask, you're not healing them. You're feeding them in the darkness where they grow without supervision. And every time you proclaim, "I am a loving person," while denying your capacity for resentment, you're not being loving. You're being selective, fragmented, divided within yourself. And here is something I discovered after working with hundreds of patients. Something you may recognize in your own experience if you are honest enough to observe yourself. The people who speak the most about light, positivity, kindness, and self-love are often the ones carrying the densest, heaviest, and most unintegrated shadows. Why? Because they use the language of self-love as a shield, as a spiritual costume that protects them from encountering the fullness of who they are. They cling to the light because they are terrified of meeting what lives in their own night. I remember a patient who came to my practice. I will call her Helen. Helen was the most spiritual person you could imagine. She meditated every morning, repeated affirmations during the day, attended every workshop about self-love, and filled journals with quotes about inner peace. But there was a problem. In her relationships, Helen was deeply critical. She judged everyone around her, dissecting their flaws as if she were performing emotional surgery. And when I pointed this out, she looked at me startled and said, "But Dr. Jung, I only want to help people become better." Do you see the mechanism? Helen had taken her tendency to criticize, her judgmental impulses, her need to control, and had sent all of it straight into the shadow. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It never does. It simply found a socially acceptable way to express itself. It disguised itself as spiritual guidance. It put on the mask of helping others grow. But beneath that mask, the same unconscious impulses were still running the show. And this brings us to a crucial question. A question I want you to ask yourself right now, without running away from it, without sugarcoating it, without spiritualizing it. What parts of yourself have you sent to the basement? What aspects of your being have you labeled as unacceptable? Perhaps it is your anger. Maybe you grew up in a home where anger was forbidden, where being angry meant being disrespectful, where you learned that good people never raise their voice. So every time you felt a wave of rage, you pushed it down. "I'm not angry," you told yourself. "I'm just disappointed." But that anger is still alive down in the basement, fermenting, thickening, transforming itself into something more volatile. And now it leaks through in ways you can't predict or control. In passive-aggressive sarcasm, in headaches that appear out of nowhere, in sudden explosions that leave you confused afterward, wondering where they even came from. Or perhaps it is your sense of need. Maybe you were taught that needing others is weakness, that strong people are always independent, always self-sufficient, never vulnerable. So each time you felt the impulse to ask for help, to reach out for comfort, to admit that you couldn't carry everything alone, you swallowed the urge. "I'm fine," you said. I don't need anyone. But that need didn't vanish. It became more desperate in the darkness. And now it shows up in distorted forms, in relationships where you sabotage intimacy without knowing why, in a lingering emptiness that no amount of achievements can fill, in a silent hunger for connection that you don't dare name. Or perhaps, this may surprise you, it is your joy. Yes, joy. Some of you have sent your capacity for genuine joy down to the basement. Somewhere along the way, you learned that life is a serious matter, that being playful is irresponsible, that laughing too much is childish. So you constructed a personality that looks mature, composed, responsible. But repressed joy does not mature. It stiffens. It becomes rigidity. It becomes a life that feels more like an endless obligation than an expression of your true self. And little by little, you forget what it feels like to be genuinely alive. I'm about to reveal something that will hold your attention until the very end, so listen carefully. This entire mechanism of rejecting parts of yourself is not just a psychological issue. It is the root of why you cannot love yourself. You cannot love what you do not know, and you cannot know what you refuse to face. Self-love is not built by repeating the sentence, "I love myself," every morning. It is built by daring to descend into the depths of your own being, by meeting the exiled parts of your psyche, by reclaiming everything you once rejected. Only when the rejected fragments return to the whole can love become real. It is impossible to truly love something you keep denying whenever you look in the mirror and say, "I love myself." In reality, you only embrace the edited version of who you are. The carefully curated image you've decided is acceptable, the version you believe the world might approve of. And if that is the version you love, then you are not loving yourself at all. You are loving an idea, a polished illusion, a comforting lie that shields you from confronting the fullness of your own being. Genuine love, the kind of love that liberates and heals, demands wholeness, not selective acceptance. And wholeness can only emerge through a deliberate and courageous encounter with everything you have pushed away. Wholeness appears only through a process Carl Jung called individuation. Individuation is not about becoming special, nor is it a path toward perfection or some mystical state of enlightenment. It is the deeper, quieter, and far more demanding work of becoming who you truly are by integrating everything you have rejected or denied. It is the process of descending into your inner basement, switching on the light, and looking directly at whatever you find there, not with fear, not with judgment, but with recognition. It is saying to the neglected parts of yourself, "You too belong to me." But let me be completely honest with you. This is not a beautiful process. It's not a gentle spiritual exercise. It is not a 10-minute meditation where you imagine embracing your shadow with a smile. It is a genuine confrontation with your own darkness, a meeting with the parts of your psyche that you've kept hidden even from yourself. And yes, that encounter is terrifying. In my own journey, I faced moments where I ventured into the deepest layers of my psyche and discovered aspects of myself that shocked me. I saw my capacity for cruelty. I saw the seeds of manipulation, hiding beneath the belief that I was acting for the good of others. I saw the subtle ways in which my ego had masked my wounds as virtues. And when I saw those things, the temptation to retreat, to climb the stairs quickly, shut the door, and pretend I hadn't witnessed anything, was overwhelming. It felt easier to say, "That isn't really me." That's just the dark part I don't need to look at. That doesn't count. But here is the truth I want you to understand. The truth that leads you toward the revelation I promised. If you reject your shadow will control you. Whatever you keep unconscious will rule your life from the dark, appearing as fate. Look at the repetitive patterns in your life. You find yourself again and again in the same painful situations, choosing the same toxic person with a different face, sabotaging your achievements just as you approach success. You explode with anger toward the people you love most, and afterward, you don't understand why you acted that way. This is not bad luck. This is not the universe working against you. This is your shadow crying out to be acknowledged. Every repeating pattern is a message, an echo from the rejected parts of yourself saying, "See me. I exist. I am you." And as long as you ignore that voice, as long as you insist that you are only light, as long as you continue repeating empty affirmations of self-love without doing the real work of integration, you will remain divided within yourself, and a fragmented person cannot love themselves because they don't truly know who they are. But I want to take you deeper still, because the personal shadow is only the beginning. Beneath the basement of your personal identity lies an even deeper level, the collective unconscious. This is where universal patterns reside, archetypes that echo across all cultures and all human experience. And in those depths, I discovered something extraordinary. Every human being carries within themselves not only their personal shadow, but the potential for every human possibility. The saint and the criminal, the hero and the coward, the sage and the fool, they all live within you. This is not poetic symbolism. It is a psychological reality. When you read about a horrifying crime and say, "How could someone do that?" what you are truly saying is, "How could I ever do that?" Because in the depths of your psyche, under the right conditions, shaped by the right pressures and history, you also could. I know this is uncomfortable to hear. I know your mind wants to reject it instantly. "No, Carl, never. I am a good person." That rejection itself tells me we've touched something important. One of the greatest illusions of modern psychology is that human beings can be neatly divided into good and bad, some holding only light, while others hold only darkness. But in all my decades of study, I never met a single person made only of light. I have never encountered a psyche that did not contain the full potential of the human experience. The difference between the saint and the criminal does not lie in the presence or absence of a shadow. Both possess one. The true difference is that the saint has learned to face, recognize, and integrate that shadow consciously, while the criminal remains possessed by it without realizing it. Think about this carefully, because it reveals something essential about human nature. The most dangerous person is not the one who openly recognizes their capacity for darkness and keeps it under conscious observation. The truly dangerous individual is the one who is absolutely convinced of their own complete goodness, the one who believes themselves morally flawless. That person, unaware of their own shadow, will act out their darkness while convincing themselves they are acting righteously. The greatest horrors in history were not committed by people who perceived themselves as evil. They were committed by those who believed with unwavering certainty that they were doing what was right. People who projected their entire shadow onto others and felt duty-bound to destroy this projected darkness. When a person loses contact with their own inner contradictions, their shadow becomes a force unleashed upon the world. And this brings us to another crucial reason Why self-love feels impossible for so many. You not only reject your shadow, you also project it onto others. Every time you see something in another person that irritates you far more than the situation warrants. Every time you feel an intense emotional reaction towards someone else's behavior, there is a high probability that you are witnessing your own unintegrated shadow reflected back at you. What bothers you most in others is often precisely what you have not yet accepted within yourself. If attention seekers enrage you, ask yourself what parts of your own need for attention you have denied. If selfish people irritate you deeply, ask where your own unacknowledged selfishness hides. And if you despise those you perceive as weak, consider which of your own vulnerabilities you are refusing to see. This is uncomfortable work, but here is the beautiful part. When you begin pulling back your projections, when you start recognizing that what you see in others also lives within you, something extraordinary begins to unfold. You start developing genuine compassion, not the superficial compassion that arises from moral superiority, but a deeper understanding born from the recognition that you too are capable of the same behaviors. I once worked with a man who hated his father for being distant and cold. His entire life, he had sworn he would be different. But as we had the courage to explore his shadow, he discovered that he too was distant and cold, especially toward his own children. He had spent so much of his life rejecting that part of himself that he could no longer see it. Yet once he finally recognized it, once he could say, "I also carry that coldness within me," something shifted. He was able to consciously work with that part of himself, and paradoxically, by accepting it instead of denying it, he could finally begin to transform it. This is something popular psychology fails to understand. You do not transform what you deny. You transform only what you accept. Acceptance is always the first step toward genuine transformation. Now I want you to remember the promise made at the beginning. I told you that at the end of this journey, I would reveal the deepest truth about why you cannot love yourself. We are reaching that moment. But before we arrive, I need to share one last essential idea. At the center of your psyche, beyond the conscious ego, beyond the personal shadow, and even beyond the collective unconscious, there exists what the self. The self is your total potential, the complete wholeness of who you are. It is what you become when you integrate all the fragmented parts of your being. It is the union of opposites, the harmony of light and darkness together. It is peace and conflict, strength and vulnerability woven into a single essence. The self is not something you create. It is something you discover, something that has always been there, waiting for you to develop the courage to uncover it. And the process of individuation is the journey of aligning yourself with the self, becoming who you truly are by integrating everything you have rejected. And so here we reach the final moment, the revelation you were promised. Why is it that you cannot love yourself? Because you do not truly know yourself. You have been trying to love an edited version of who you are, a polished, socially acceptable character that exists only on the surface. You have tried to love the version of yourself that you show to the world while denying the existence of the basement underneath your personality. And partial love, conditional love, can never satisfy you because deep down, you know it is not real. True self-love, the kind that liberates, transforms, and heals, can only exist when you dare to know your whole being. When you walk down into that basement, when you turn on the light, When you look directly at your shadow and say, "You are also me, and I choose to love you too." You cannot love yourself until you truly know yourself, and you cannot fully know yourself without passing through your own darkness. This is the most beautiful paradox. Only when you accept that you are also darkness can you begin to shine with authentic light. Only when you embrace your capacity for wrongdoing can you consciously choose what is good. Only when you recognize your totality can you finally love yourself in a real and lasting way. The path is not to deny the shadow, it is to integrate it. The path is not to pretend you are perfect, it is to accept that you are human. The path is not pure light, it is the light that rises consciously from integrated darkness. And when you finally do that work, when you finally descend into the depths of your psyche and meet everything you once rejected, something miraculous happens. You begin to feel a kind of self-love you once believed was unreachable. Not because you suddenly became flawless, but because maybe for the first time in your life, you are becoming whole. This love doesn't depend on empty affirmations or on forcing yourself to believe something you don't truly feel. It doesn't need to be rehearsed or repeated like a script. It simply arises, quietly and powerfully, because it is the natural love that emerges when your whole self finally meets itself without fear, without denial, and without masks. It is the love of your total being toward your total being. The kind of love as the inevitable result of inner integration. And so my final invitation for you today is this. Stop trying to love yourself in fragments. Stop giving affection only to the parts of you that look clean, polished, spiritual, or socially acceptable. Stop rejecting the places where your sadness hides, where your anger sleeps, where your fear trembles. Stop pretending you are made of light. Only have the courage to descend. Have the courage to travel into the depths of your own psyche. Have the courage to meet yourself entirely. Have the courage to integrate the shadow that has been calling your name for years. Because when you finally dare to face what you've been avoiding, you will discover something extraordinary. The love you were desperately searching for outside of you. The acceptance you expected others to grant you. The peace you tried to chase through achievements, success, productivity, or recognition. None of that was ever missing. It was simply waiting for you in the basement of your own psyche, hidden in the parts of yourself you feared the most. Everything you longed for has been living in the corners you refused to enter. The work I am asking you to do is not easy. It is not soft, nor comfortable, nor instantly rewarding. It is the kind of work that requires honesty, patience, and a willingness to let your own truth dismantle you before it rebuilds you. But it is also the only work that truly matters. Because at the end of your life, the question will not be whether others loved you enough. The question will be whether you had the courage to fully love yourself, your entire self, not just the edited parts you thought were worthy of affection. If this journey has resonated with you, if you feel that something deep inside you has awakened, even slightly, I invite you to continue exploring these inner landscapes with me. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep descending together into the depths of the human psyche, where real transformation begins. Share this message with someone who may be ready to hear it, and tell me in the comments which aspect of your shadow you feel ready to acknowledge, embrace, or integrate. In our next encounter, we will explore how your dreams act as direct messages from your unconscious, as if the deeper layers of your being were trying to whisper precisely what you need to integrate in order to evolve. I will show you how to interpret the symbolic language of your psyche so you can accelerate your process of individuation, the path that leads to psychological wholeness. Until then, keep this in your heart. You are not only light. You are both light and darkness. You are the coexistence of your highest potential and your most hidden truths, and your greatness does not come from denying your shadow or pretending it doesn't exist, but from embracing it consciously, with compassion and presence. That is the path to true self-love. That is the path to inner freedom. That is the path toward becoming the complete human being you were always meant to be. What if I told you that you're not actually depressed, but awakening? What if this emotional darkness you're facing isn't a curse, but a sacred initiation, one that no one ever explained to you? In this video, you're about to uncover a truth that has been hidden beneath the surface of your pain. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of a profound journey inward, toward the very core of your soul. Carl Jung once descended into that same abyss. He didn't study it from afar. He plunged into the chaos, into his dreams, his fears, and the shadows that haunted him. He heard voices that weren't metaphorical. He saw images not drawn from imagination, but summoned from the deepest layers of the psyche. And when he returned, he didn't come back with theories. He came back with fire. Today, you may be standing at that very threshold, confused, exhausted, disconnected from the world. But what you may not realize is that you're crossing into what Jung called the initiation of the soul. It's not something that happens in temples or rituals. It happens in the silence, in the stillness, in the hollow spaces where your old self begins to crumble. So don't run from the silence. Listen, because within that silence, something ancient calls to you, and that voice is your own. Stay with me. What you're about to hear may forever alter the way you understand your suffering. You probably can't even pinpoint when it began. There was no clear day, no single wound, no one dramatic event that tore you apart. It was something slower, subtler, like smoke slipping in beneath the door of your life. At first, just a subtle pressure in your chest. Then a silence that spread through your thoughts. The things that once lit you up began to seem distant, unreal. People kept talking. You kept nodding. But inside, you were fading. You started calling it depression. Everyone does. But what if it's not that? What if it's not the end of you, but the beginning? Jung spent 6 years in a descent into this very darkness. He didn't call it a breakdown. He called it a descent into the self. And from that descent was born the most mysterious, powerful, and sacred work he ever produced, the Red Book. A book so intimate, so dangerous, that he never wanted it published while he lived. A book filled with symbols, madness, dialogues with gods and demons, and above all, a message for people like you, who feel like they're standing on the edge of oblivion. You're not depressed. You're awakening. And this isn't about shallow spirituality or quick fixes. This is psychological alchemy. This is an inner exorcism. Because right now, your passions feel dead. You wake up tired. You no longer care about the goals you used to chase. People ask you what's wrong, but you don't know how to answer. You cry in silence. You pretend to be strong because the world expects it. But Jung discovered a truth while walking through that same darkness. Depression isn't always a malfunction. Sometimes it's the soul withdrawing from a life it no longer recognizes as true. You're not broken. You're being called inward, pulled into the underworld of your unconscious. And like Jung, you're not meant to escape this chaos. but to walk through it and to be transformed by it. The Red Book wasn't a diary. It was a map, a record of what happens when a human being stops performing and starts facing everything they've repressed. Jung called this his confrontation with the unconscious. He had visions. He heard voices. He met archetypal figures within himself that shattered the identity he thought was real. And what he found there wasn't madness. It was truth. So let me ask you something. The question that threads through every word of this message. What if the reason you feel numb is because the version of yourself you've been living no longer has anything left to say? What if your depression isn't caused by a chemical imbalance, but by a spiritual imbalance? What if the life you've built, the roles, the titles, the accomplishments, was never really your life, and now the mask is decaying, and your soul refuses to keep acting? This is not a breakdown. It's a spiritual rebellion. Jung said something that should strike you like thunder. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. But not you, because if you found your way to these words, it means you've already begun to sense the truth. Pain isn't random. It's a message. Your depression isn't just speaking about your past. It's revealing the false identity you've clung to. So let me paint an image that Jung would have understood better than anyone. You're in a house. Every room is full of people. You've smiled. You've played the roles. You've kept the peace. You've tried to belong. But now, without telling anyone, you've walked down into the basement. It's dimly lit. It's cold. And for the first time, you are alone. This is where most people panic. They rush back upstairs, desperate for noise, comfort, distraction. But if you stay, if you sit in that dim silence long enough, something strange begins to happen. You start to hear whispers, not from the outside world, but from a deep corner within you. And one of those whispers says, "I've been waiting for you." That voice is your true self, the one you abandoned in order to survive, the one who never wanted to be perfect, only whole. The Red Book was Jung's testimony of what happens when you choose not to go back upstairs, when you stay, when you sit in the darkness and face the chaos, not to find answers, but to listen. At first, all he found was confusion, monsters, fear, blood. But he kept listening, and eventually, he found his soul. So what does this mean for you? Maybe you don't need to numb yourself. Maybe you don't need to snap out of it. Maybe what you're experiencing isn't a disease to be cured quickly, but a rite of passage that demands reverence and courage. Maybe, just maybe, you are not falling apart. You are being stripped down so you can finally meet yourself. Maybe what you need isn't to fake another smile or adjust your attitude just to fit in. Maybe what you truly need is to surrender, to stop resisting, to allow the outdated version of yourself to slowly dissolve. Maybe you need to sit in the silence long enough until a deeper voice, your own, finally begins to speak. That's the real purpose of this message, to flip the script that society has imposed on you about what depression really is. You are not weak, you are not lazy, you are not broken or doomed. What's happening to you is not a malfunction. It's a calling. A force older than any social construct, older than your pain, older even than your thoughts, is pulling you inward. You are being summoned by your unconscious. And if you have the courage to truly enter that abyss, you may never return as the same person. But that is precisely the point of going in. So let me ask you again, what if you're not depressed? What if, for the first time in your life, you're finally listening to the voice you've been running from all along? And what if that voice is you? We've been led to believe that this darkness is a personal defect, a lonely labyrinth we alone have wandered into. But what if I told you this feeling was never meant to be a medical sentence? What if it was always a door that Carl Jung himself dared to walk through, when he let go of everything he thought he was, his career, his theories, his identity, even his sanity. He didn't write the Red Book to escape the darkness. He wrote it to face it, to hear it, to uncover the wisdom hidden within it. We live in an age that has sanitized depression, reduced it to a chemical imbalance, a serotonin issue, a buzzword like self-care. But Jung understood something far more terrifying and far more liberating. He believed the only true purpose of human existence was to bring light into the darkness of the soul. To Jung, the soul didn't retreat from consciousness because it was damaged. It retreated because it was being ignored by your masks, your attachments, your desperate need to seem normal. So what did Jung do when the soul withdrew? He didn't try to fix it. He didn't run. He followed it, into visions, into myth, into madness. The Red Book is the record of that journey, a descent into symbolic landscapes, endless deserts, ancient serpents, war gods, divine mothers, forgotten towers, and ruins that still whisper. Jung called that inner world the collective unconscious, an ancient spiritual ecosystem, older than your history, your culture, or even your name. And in that chaos, he didn't just find shadows, he found messages. Jung encountered Philemon, a prophetic and wise figure who guided him through the madness. Philemon wasn't real, but he was true. He symbolized the inner guide we all carry, the one who only begins to speak when everything else within us has gone quiet. Then came the Red One, a dark, seductive force, representing desire, destruction, repressed passion. Jung didn't fight him. He didn't run. He listened, because these figures were not hallucinations. They were fragments of his own psyche, forgotten, rejected, buried. And here's where the truth hits hard. For Jung, depression was not the absence of happiness. It was the eruption of truth. The truth about friendships you maintained out of inertia. The truth about dreams that were never truly yours. The truth about the masks you wore for years just to feel safe. So the soul revolts, not with screaming, but with numbness, fatigue, apathy, disconnection. It shuts off the surface noise because it needs you to go deeper. This is why Jung's experience matters now more than ever. He stopped treating the unconscious as a disease. He began to treat it as a language made of symbols, of dreams, of sudden moods, of emotions that defy logic. What we call depression, Jung called initiation, a psychic death. And like all deaths, it's chaotic. You lose motivation, you lose clarity, you lose people, you even lose the self you thought you were. But buried beneath the ashes, something else is trying to emerge. A version of you that is real. A self that no longer performs. A self that no longer apologizes for existing. Let's be honest, this awakening is not beautiful. It feels more like decomposition than revelation. You may isolate yourself, cry for no reason, feel rage, shame, guilt, even spiritual nausea. You may stop wanting anything. You may feel dead inside. But Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Because becoming real is not a convenient choice. It is a sacred offering. You give up the need to please in order to be whole. You give up the need to be understood in order to be authentic. You give up comfort in exchange for life itself. Here's the hidden truth. What we often call depression is actually the surface name for a soul undergoing radical reorganization. And society wants you to numb it, avoid it, distract it, because a person who wakes up is dangerous. They can no longer be manipulated. They stop chasing counterfeit love. They walk away. They see through masks. They live from truth, not from approval. That's what the Red Book revealed. Not just visions, but liberation. So if you feel like you're losing your mind, if your old world seems to be dying, if you can no longer fake your smile, don't be afraid. You are not broken. You are being born. Born as someone who no longer needs to play dead just to be accepted. Someone who no longer waits for permission to feel. You are not regressing. You are not falling apart. You are waking up inside a reality that was never designed to contain you. And that pain you feel, it's the weight of a larger soul trying to fit into a life that has become too small. It's the sound of your inner world cracking open. It's your unconscious screaming, "This life is no longer enough. Become something more." And that is not depression. That is awakening. Nobody talks about what happens after the awakening begins. We hear about healing, about growth, but not about that stretch in between, where it feels like you're dying slowly, not physically, but spiritually. Because when you finally stop pretending, when your soul starts pulling you inward, when the world's noise fades into nothing, what remains is silence. And that silence is deafening. You thought awakening would feel like light, but at first, it feels like losing everything. You stop craving the things that used to define you. You stop chasing the things that never truly nourished you. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real life begins. You stop connecting with the people you used to laugh with. You walk into familiar places, but they feel foreign now. The music you once adored suddenly sounds hollow. Your ambitions slip like sand through your fingers. You no longer recognize yourself, and that's terrifying. But it's also the only way forward. As Jung revealed in the Red Book, enlightenment doesn't come from imagining beings of light. It comes from bringing the darkness into consciousness. And that darkness isn't outside of you. It lives inside, in the parts of yourself you've suppressed to be liked, to fit in, to survive. So what happens when the soul begins to awaken? Your relationships begin to collapse, not with explosions, but quietly, like bridges crumbling under weight they were never built to hold. Conversations lose their spark. You start to realize it was always you who listened the most, who made peace, who fixed things, who bent over backward. And one day, you just stop. You stop being the first to reach out. You stop laughing just to avoid tension. You stop watering friendships that have long since withered. And when that happens, people start to say, "You've changed." They say you're cold, distant, different. They're right. You're no longer the same. You finally stopped pretending. And then grief shows up. Grief for yourself. Yes, grief. Because that version of you, the people pleaser, the perfectionist, the tireless, the silent, the strong, that was just a mask for survival. And even though it hurt you, it also protected you. It helped you move through a world that rewards obedience, not authenticity. So when you begin peeling off those masks, one by one, don't be surprised if you feel empty. But that emptiness is not the end. It's a sacred space where something real can finally be born. And then comes the emotional whiplash, a brief moment of peace, followed by anger, then tears, then numbness, then a strange clarity, and then despair again. You begin to think there's something wrong with you. But Jung would say, this is exactly right. Because when the unconscious surfaces, it brings everything with it. Childhood wounds, buried guilt, unspoken rage, hidden desires, cloaked in shame. They don't rise up to destroy you. They rise to be acknowledged. Until now, they've ruled your life from the shadows. But now, they emerge into the light. And yes, it's chaos, but necessary chaos. Suddenly, you no longer chase anyone's approval. It's not that you've grown cold. It's that you finally understand the truth. The things that once filled you, the praise, the numbers, the likes, now echo with emptiness. You pour your heart into something, and no one responds, and it doesn't crush you anymore. You speak your truth, and if people distort it, you let them. You realize that the need for validation was a quiet addiction, one that numbed your soul. And once you break free from that addiction, you discover a new craving for silence, for solitude, for self-respect. And then something unexpected happens. You become a mirror, not because you talk too much, but because your unmasked presence begins to disturb others. Your calm makes them feel judged. Your clarity unsettles them. Your boundaries make them feel abandoned. Your truth exposes theirs. You didn't do anything wrong. You were just being yourself. But many won't like what the mirror reflects. And sadly, that's not your burden to carry. You're not here to beautify their reflections. Carl Jung reached this very threshold in his Red Book, a place marked by solitude, visions, internal conflict, and an aching hunger for liberation. He stepped into the abyss of the unconscious with no map and no guarantee of return. He lost friendships. He was called insane. Even his professional peers distanced themselves from him. But he didn't turn back, because he couldn't. When you've looked your soul directly in the eyes, you can no longer pretend you didn't see it. You can no longer unsee its presence, and you certainly cannot go back to living as if it doesn't exist. Let's be honest with each other. This process of awakening doesn't arrive according to a plan. It doesn't check your calendar or notify you ahead of time. It can take weeks, months, years, but it always leads you to one inevitable destination: truth. And truth, it's not gentle. It doesn't show up to comfort you or sing you lullabies. It comes with fire. It burns illusions to the ground. But in the ashes, there's clarity. Pure, unfiltered clarity. You start feeling lighter. Not in the sense of happiness that makes you want to dance or laugh all the time, but in a way that feels anchored, real, centered. You feel stripped of the unnecessary. Maybe not happy in the conventional sense, but true. And that kind of truth brings a joy that doesn't need a smile to validate it. So if you find yourself now, in this moment, lost in darkness, trembling in uncertainty, engulfed by confusion, listen closely. You are not alone. You're not broken. You're not dying. You are transforming. Everything false within you, every performance, every mask, every illusion is crumbling. And it's supposed to. Let it collapse. Because beneath that debris, something sacred is waiting to be born. You've already felt the pain. You've already dwelled in silence. You've lost people, energy, your sense of identity. So now what? You are no longer who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. You are in the sacred in-between. And that is where the true self is born. Not from effort or empty affirmations, but from surrender. Let's speak clearly now. To free yourself does not mean to escape. It means to integrate. Because if you run away from your pain, it will simply wear a different disguise and return. If you deny your shadow, it will reappear in other forms. Addiction, toxic love, false success. If you avoid descending into your depths, you will live a half-life, numb and fragmented. Jung didn't become great by avoiding madness. He became great because he entered it willingly, with eyes wide open. And when he emerged, he didn't bring back theories. He brought fire. This is the real path to freedom. Not as a defense mechanism, but as a soul rebirth. Let go of the need to be understood. You've spent your whole life explaining yourself, explaining to parents, to friends, to society. No more. You were not born to be understood. You were born to be whole. And being whole means some people will call you selfish, cold, distant. Let them. Being misunderstood is the price of authenticity. When you stop chasing validation, you set yourself free, and your truth becomes your armor. Accept that you are not who you once thought you were. That identity was shaped in fear, in pain, in the constant pursuit of approval. You thought you were strong because you didn't cry, that you were kind because you never said no, that you were healing because you were always busy. But now you see it. None of that was healing. It was compensation. Letting that version of yourself go hurts like death, because it is. You are burying the part of you that only ever wanted to be loved. Don't hate that part. Don't judge it. Thank it. And then gently release it. Keep walking. And finally, create a new ritual around your silence. In the Red Book, Jung thought. He listened. He wrote. He painted. He walked. He meditated. He transformed his silence into a sacred temple, not a prison. Let your silence do the same. Let it speak to you. Let it show you the things your busy mind never dared to look at. Silence is not empty. It is full of truths that have always been there, but the world was never quiet enough for you to hear them. Now finally listen, and let that echo rebuild you. When the old world collapses before your eyes, resist the urge to rebuild using the same bricks that already betrayed your soul. Don't rewrite the same story with the same ink that once poisoned your spirit. This is the time for a new code, one that doesn't trade your authenticity for acceptance, one that doesn't seek applause but inner alignment, one that finally and fully honors the soul that waited lifetimes to be remembered. Do not sacrifice your peace for the approval of others. Let this be your new code of living, a silent but powerful inner law where you no longer chase after things that leave you feeling empty, where your peace becomes sacred ground, untouchable, unwavering. You begin to walk away from what once drained you, and you do so without guilt. You speak your truth plainly, without the need to soften it for anyone's comfort. You stop defending your worth because it stands self-evident. You love, yes, but you no longer beg to be loved. And this inner code, this new compass, becomes your anchor. Because the world will try to pull you back. It will attempt to lure you into your old patterns, to seduce you into fitting in again. But when it does, your new self will smile. Not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. And it will say, with calm and strength, I don't live there anymore. The label of depression is heavy, but it's not permanent. It can feel like a sentence, like a verdict that defines your identity. But listen closely, even if it makes you uncomfortable. You are not your diagnosis. You are not your wound. You are not merely a chemical imbalance in the brain. Yes, your pain is real. Your suffering deserves compassion. But it is not the deepest truth about you. There is something deeper, something ancient, something sacred that has always lived beneath the surface, quietly waiting to be rediscovered. Carl Jung didn't see depression as a dead end. For him, it was never just an affliction. It was a rite of passage, a descent into the sacred underworld of the soul. Not a collapse, but an initiation. The Red Book did not offer solutions, it offered a mirror that shows you not how to go back to who you were, but how to become who you really are. So stop trying to return to the version of you that existed before the darkness. That person never truly existed. That was the mask, the performance, the illusion. Now you act differently, not because you're afraid, but because you finally see things clearly. You say no without guilt. You leave the rooms that silence your spirit. You rest before you burn out. You stay silent when the world refuses to listen. You stop performing for love. You let your silence speak for you. And most importantly, you no longer need external validation to feel real. Because you've remembered something timeless. You were real long before anyone ever rewarded you for being so. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about shedding everything you never were. That's what Jung did. And when he returned from his own descent, he didn't just come back with theories. He changed the course of psychology. He transformed how we understand the soul. Because he dared to face what most people run from, his own abyss. And you have that same power, but it won't come through fighting. It will come when you finally surrender, when you sit in your own fire and learn to listen to the silence within it. You were never broken. You were buried. And now you rise, not perfectly, but authentically. You begin to walk differently, no longer for applause, no longer for attention, no longer to be seen or admired. You walk with gravity. You walk with presence, not to impress, but simply to exist. And yes, you will lose people along the way. Let them go. You will question yourself. Keep going anyway. You will feel the ache of solitude. But in that solitude, you will meet someone you've long forgotten. Yourself. The one who never abandoned you. The one who weathered the storm. The one who sat beside the shadows. The one who breathed through the emptiness and never gave up. And now that you've seen the truth, you will never trade it again for comfort or acceptance. So here it is, the final line that echoes through every soul that has dared to descend and return. You are not depressed. You are remembering who you are. And you are not done. You are just beginning.